Recording in progress.
It's been live streamed today.
Yeah, recording in live stream. Yes. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's information session. Before we start, a reminder that this workshop is being live streamed. However, while this workshop is open to the public, it is for staff to provide guidance to elected members. It is not a forum for debate or decisions. It is also not a forum for the public to provide input into decisions or bring us other matters to the attention of the council. If a member of the public wants to do that, please have a yarn to staff and they'll help you have your say. We have received no apologies for this information session today, and I was actually waiting for Kelly to come in so I could embarrass him, but he's not here just at this second. So
feel free to embarrass him at any time.
I will embarrass him when he arrives. So we got local water done well. Water service delivery model options. Far away, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this follows on from some previous information sessions we've had and is a summary of information sort of leading into a decision report coming to you next week. This is a sort of a culmination of many months of work in terms of what we need to do under the legislation in terms of consulting on delivery model options. So Luke's going to lead you through that. He's held the pen on a lot of the stuff, and Gavin's up here as well as head of Three Waters. We'll switch part way through when we get to the financial section, and we'll have Bede and Mitchell come up and explain the financials of the different options as we go through. So we'll kick off now, and we'll have questions right at the very end, please, if you could note them down so that we can get through the whole presentation.
Cool. All right. So today's session, I'll just run through the purpose first. We'll recap the context and its implications for council. We'll go through the legislative framework, and because that sets the requirements of what we need to do. I'll run through the water service delivery models that we've evaluated and the criteria that we use to assess them. We'll summarise the evaluation findings, and that includes detailed financial modelling, and that's to understand the trade-offs and the opportunities of each model, and then we'll outline the next steps.
Okay.
So before we get into the details, I'll just recap. We've seen this before, but I'll cover it off again. Fundamentally, local water done well is a centrally driven reform aimed to address New Zealand's, as a nation, long-standing water infrastructure challenges. It provides some local flexibility. However, the reform puts a strong emphasis on compliance with centrally directed regulatory requirements. At its core, there's a few principles that is guiding its implementation. The first one being water services must be financially sustainable, and we need to have sufficient revenue for long-term investment. Delivery models that are implemented and used for water services delivery need to be fit for purpose with the right structure and governance to meet both the mandated requirements and local needs. And there is an expectation that the new stricter rules for water and infrastructure quality will drive the appropriate amount of investment. So where we are in the process, in February last year, the Water Services Act, or Repeal Act, was passed, and that reinstated council ownership and control of water assets and the services as well. And that was previously impacted by the Three Waters reform. That was followed by the Preliminary Arrangements Act, which took effect, requiring councils to prepare water services delivery plans. And it also outlines what we need to do when deciding what our future water services delivery model is. The Water Services Bill that was introduced in December. Now, it is a bill and it's expected to be enacted mid this year. And that provides the enduring framework for water services delivery. It outlines the delivery model options that are available to us, and the rules and regulations around economic regulation and updated quality standards. Now, the stage that we're at the moment is we've developed a preliminary business case, and that outlines the advantages and disadvantages and the trade-offs of the viable service delivery model options that are available to us, and it makes a recommendation on that as well. So that'll be for your consideration at your council meeting next week. So the legislative framework, I'll cover this off again very quickly. So we've talked about the Water Services Repeal Act. This was the first step, revoking the previous 3 waters. The Preliminary Arrangements Act, this is a fundamental thing that sets up the requirement to submit a water services delivery plan by September 2025. So this plan needs to detail our proposed service delivery model, as well as the baseline asset, finance and infrastructure data of our water services network and our strategies for meeting new regulatory obligations as well. And then the Local Government Water Services Bill that was tabled in December, as I said, and that sets the enduring legislative framework, includes the water service delivery options, the economic regulation regime led by the Commerce Commission, and the enhanced standards for wastewater and stormwater. And like I said, we expect that to be passed mid this year. At the moment, the Water Services Delivery Plan is our most immediate focus and deliverable under the reform, and it needs to outline how we'll meet the enhanced regulatory and investment expectations, while at the same time ensuring affordable, reliable water services for Christchurch. And as mentioned, there we go. It's a fundamental requirement, and it requires us to detail our current water infrastructure and future investment needs, outline our financial and operational strategies that we'll use to meet the new regulatory standards, and it needs to be finalised, endorsed by Council and submitted to the Department of Internal Affairs by September. Critically, and this is what the rest of the conversation is really going to be focusing on, is it needs to include detail on our proposed service delivery model. It needs to outline how we'll structure and manage our water services to meet the reform's new regulatory obligations while balancing efficiency, sustainability, and also community priorities. And this is the focus of what the business case that you'll be receiving and considering next week. And that's what the rest of the presentation will focus on as well. So the selection of a service delivery model. There is some flexibility, but we've been given, models that we need to choose from. So we can continue to deliver services directly, as we do now, but there would need to be some enhancements to meet the new regulatory requirements. We can transfer responsibilities to a CCO through a transfer agreement. We can contract third parties to deliver the services, but while retaining council ownership, governance, and control over the assets, strategy, and pricing. We can partner with other councils through joint arrangements, so that would be a regional water entity. We can also become a shareholder in other councils' water entities as well. If a separate entity is created, so whether that is a regional entity or our own CCO entity, it must be council or consumer trust owned, and it has to focus exclusively on water with an independent competency-based board. Elected members or council staff would not be permitted to be on that board. There's also some pretty clear requirements of what we need to do when we determine what our proposed delivery model is. So in doing that, the legislation requires a comprehensive analysis and a comparative analysis between various options. We need to show a clear rationale for our proposed model with a trade-off against other models as well. The advantages, disadvantages, and trade-offs, they clearly need to be evaluated, and impacts on key factors like rates, council borrowing, levels of service, and consumer costs must be assessed in detail. We also need to present this analysis to the community for feedback before any final decisions are made. So there's a couple of pathways that we have in terms of consulting with the community. We can either follow the standard consultation and engagement provisions that are in the LGA. Alternatively, there is a streamlined approach which is available in the Preliminary Arrangements Act, which provides a tailored consultation process specifically for the water delivery models. It's designed to simplify the process and keep it focused on the requirements, making sure that we can make decisions as quickly as possible. If we take this process, there are still a few requirements. We've got to evaluate and present at least 2 models for consultation, and these must be the current approach delivering water. So for us, that's the in-house model. And we also need to consult on either a CCO or a joint local government arrangement. So that would be a regional CCO, for example. We can include additional models as well, but they're the 2 models that we must consult on. Importantly, as part of that is the council needs to clearly identify which one of those models is its proposed model, and the consultation materials need to be really focused so we can get good, valid community feedback. So as already mentioned, we're providing formal advice on this, which you'll be considering next week, and you'll be presented with 3 key decisions. The first one is the approval of the consultation procedure, so whether or not to follow the standard LGA process or to use the alternative one that the Preliminary Arrangements Act allows for. You'll also need to decide on which options that we consult on, so determining which specific delivery models will be included in the public consultation process. And you'll need to decide on a preferred model to present to the community as the council's proposal. All right, I'll get into so that's the background. So with that in mind, we'll go into the service delivery models. We evaluated a wide range of options from the status quo to more independent structures. And that really is just to identify realistic, compliant pathways forward. Through that process, 3 primary options came out as really being the most viable. And the first one is obviously retaining water services in-house. It's how we do things now. However, there would be enhancements required. The second option or model was transferring all water services to a professionally governed council-controlled organisation. That's the Water Services CCO, and that would be solely owned by council. And the third option is a hybrid model where water supply and wastewater would shift to the CCO while stormwater remains in-house. That's what we call a 2 waters CCO. So each of these offer a different balance of council control, asset ownership, financial considerations, and compliance pathways, and we'll go through those in more detail. So keeping water services in-house. Under this approach, the council will retain full responsibility and control over 3 waters management, similar to how we do it today. So all decisions from governance to operations will remain in-house. Funding continues through existing tools like rates and borrowing, with financial ring fencing used to increase the transparency. The council keeps direct control over how water services are charged to the community, and meeting new compliance standards falls fully on the council. So while closest to the status quo, like I've said a few times, it's important to note that this model would still require changes to adapt to the new regulatory environment and meet the local water done well expectations, especially around financial sustainability and investment. So the 3 waters CCO, this is on the other end of the spectrum. Here an independent council-owned entity is established to operate water services, and it would be governed by a professional board. Council retains ownership and strategic oversight, but operational control would shift to the CCO. Elected members and council staff cannot be on the board. The entity has its own balance sheet and borrowing up to 500% of revenue, and that's more than council's current 280% cap. But it does face some restrictions on charging, so it can't use rates and it must shift to fixed charges or volumetric pricing within 5 years. And direct accountability for compliance would shift to the CCO. So while still council owned, this is quite a big shift towards an independent, more commercially orientated water entity. In the Two Waters CCO, it's effectively a hybrid of the two options. Here, water supply and wastewater are transferred to the CCO, while stormwater remains in-house. This means that there's professional oversight for water supply and wastewater, while keeping stormwater integrated with the council, effectively with functions like flood control and land drainage. The funding sort of parameters would be split, obviously. So the Two Waters CCO would have greater borrowing ability for its share of its services, while stormwater remains under the council financial frameworks. And compliance responsibility would be split between the two. And another thing to note is water supply and wastewater charges would still be required to be volumetric or fixed charges under the CCO model. So it tries to balance independence for the larger water services with council control of stormwater, considering that's a key element of urban planning and development and a bunch of other things that we do as well. There were other options that we considered. These were part of the initial analysis that we did, but we didn't go into the deep business case level of it. One of them was joining a regional multi-council CCO, so that's a regional water entity. The other one was pursuing a shared services model, and the other one was shifting to a consumer trust ownership model. They've all got potential benefits, but they weren't shortlisted just purely due to governance challenges, cost factors, and a poor fit for our current needs and our existing infrastructure scale. The key thing to note, though, is there is still flexibility within the three models presented earlier to transition to either of these or investigate these as well. It preserves the opportunity to us to explore them once the water services delivery plan is implemented. Right, moving on to the evaluation framework. The key thing here is we want to make sure that we're providing the council and the community with clear, objective analysis, enabling meaningful consultation and a really good, robust decision. We assess each model against two fundamental frame or lenses. The strategic assessment focused on the alignment with Christchurch's priorities, objectives, and community expectations. And we also used a financial assessment to validate the affordability and sustainability of each approach. At the end of the day, the strategic lens grounds the options in our community and makes sure we're focused on what matters most to the residents and ratepayers. The financial analysis stress tests those options just to make sure that we can actually deliver on those models that we're presenting. So I'll run through the criteria that we use for the strategic assessment. Firstly, value to ratepayers. So this was really focused around balancing service quality, costs, and investment in the long haul. We also use regulatory compliance as a criteria. This is ensuring that we can meet the existing and also the future standards effectively. Financial agility. So this assesses really the flexibility to fund infrastructure, to manage our debt, and respond to any unexpected or unanticipated requirements that we have in the future. Service delivery and operations. So this is the really ensuring the effective day-to-day provision of our water services. Governance control. So this criteria was really looking at making sure we can strike the right balance of council oversight, accountability, and independence. Community expectations. So this is really about our ability to meet public expectations for engagement, transparency, and accountability. And then implementation feasibility. So really, how feasible is it to implement this option? What are the risks and what are the complexities that we need to manage along the way? So these criteria, they reflect what we've heard from you in previous workshops that we've had. And they are quite considerable lenses for evaluating the options. So I'll run through those with a bit of a summary of how all the models stacked up shortly. Before I do that, though, I'll just quickly run through the financial assessment criteria that we used, and then after that, Mitch and Bede will be able to run through the financial modelling and the analysis as well. So the first one was around, first lens that we used really was rating and water services charge impact. So that's both the short and long-term effects on ratepayer bills and the implications of shifting to a charging model if a CCO option was proceeded with. There's investment sufficiency. So that's reviewing our capital expenditure compared to depreciation to confirm the long-term viability of infrastructure investments. So what's up on there is actually wrong because it's going to repeat right here. Revenue sufficiency. So that's ensuring each model can generate enough revenue to cover day-to-day operational expenses, as well as any necessary investment needs. Debt capacity. So ensuring each model can borrow prudently for long-term needs while managing repayment and financial obligations. And transaction costs, operational and transactional costs. So the financial implications of establishing new entities and governance structures. All right, so I'll move into the strategic assessment findings. I'll walk you through some of the headline results. So the business case itself has got this in significant detail, and I'll effectively be giving you a summary of that, and then you'll be able to refer to the business case when you receive that for consideration. So at a high level, the in-house model scored the highest in terms of strategic fit for Christchurch. It performed strongly in key areas like value to ratepayers and consistency with existing systems and infrastructure. Key highlights were it leverages established council resources and processes, so that provides some stability and initial efficiency. It avoids the significant transition costs and risks of the other models, especially in that short-term transition phase, and it maintains direct accountability to the community, and governance is retained by elected members. The CCO models, they were comparably viable. So they still scored very well. They scored especially well on financial flexibility, considering its ability to borrow more through that additional headroom. It also assumed that the specialist focus of these would drive long-term efficiencies. However, in the short term, there would be high transition costs, and the governance complexity would need to be managed appropriately, especially while standing up the entity. And it should be noted that the viability is dependent on the CCO achieving the assumed efficiencies that we've assumed. So while each, I guess, that they've all got their strengths, but the in-house approach did stand out as being the most consistent performer in the analysis. So I'll do it again. This is caveat is this is a summary. The full detail will be in the business case, but I'll provide a bit of a summary as we go through on each criteria around the strategic. And once I finish with the strategic analysis, we'll move on to the financials. So the first criteria being value to ratepayers. The in-house model provides immediate value by leveraging existing council systems. It avoids the high transition costs, and it ensures stable service delivery at a lower cost to ratepayers in the short term, particularly given our current financial health. However, both CCOs will have a professional board with a single focus, which offers long-term efficiencies. However, its high setup costs could dilute this in the short term. And the Two Waters CCO involves similar administrative complexities and similar transition costs to the CCO. In terms of regulatory compliance, all three models are capable of meeting current and future regulatory needs. The in-house model benefits from established council processes, and we've already got clear pathways for adapting to future regulatory changes. The CCO models, they can achieve compliance but would require new systems and processes, and that would increase the complexity, especially during the transition phase. In terms of financial agility, the CCO models stand out in terms of their borrowing capacity. Obviously, they're able to leverage up to 500% of revenue for infrastructure investment. And so that would make it well suited for large-scale, long-term projects and unexpected investment requirements. However, the accompanying debt servicing obligations and reliance on achieving operational efficiencies could pose an element of risk there as well. The in-house model, while it's limited to the 280% revenue limit, that is still sufficient to meet Christchurch's anticipated investment needs without the need of incurring additional debt. So we're in a good position from that perspective, and Mitch and Bede will touch on that more. In terms of service delivery and operations, the in-house model, it'll support operational synergies because it'll be able to integrate water services with other council functions, such as flood management, land drainage, parks, and urban planning. And that ensures we retain a streamlined service delivery and coordinated decision-making. The CCO models, they introduce governance separation, which could enhance the service focus. However, it does risk fragmenting operations, particularly when we're managing interdependencies between water services and other council activities. However, this would need to be managed accordingly, so systems could be put in place in order to manage that. Go back. Governance and control. So the in-house model obviously provides the highest degree of transparency and accountability to the council, as council has oversight over decisions and has the direct consideration of community priorities. CCO models, it does allow for specialised governance. However, there is a risk that, a perceived risk that it would be detached from the council and the community. However, it should be noted that the bill, it does provide council as a shareholder with the ability to influence the operations of the CCO through governance arrangements and strategy documents. The Two Waters blends that somewhat. It retains direct community input by keeping stormwater under council oversight. However, the dividends governance structure may complicate some things, but again, there would need to be some processes and systems put in place to manage that. It should also be noted, and I think this is a key thing, in the in-house, the council will retain full control over how it charges. However, under a CCO, it will be required to shift to the targeted water charges. In terms of community expectations and engagement, the ability to engage with the community would be strongest under the in-house model, as it retains the input process through the LGA democratic decision-making processes, and it will leverage the council's engagement mechanisms that are already in place. The CCO models, they would need to put in some pretty strong marketing, communications and engagement practices in order to effectively get the trust of the community and make sure that community concerns and priorities are being considered in their decision making. And the implementation feasibility is quite straightforward. The in-house model is the least disruptive and most straightforward to implement, as it's unlikely to require major structural changes. Both the CCO models, they involve significant establishment costs. There are transition risks that would need to be managed, would require some operational restructuring, and that would obviously increase the short-term disruption and complexity of moving forward with that. However, any of those continuity risks or transition risks would need to be managed carefully, and that would be part of whatever implementation planning would go ahead with those. So I guess in sum, the in-house model leverages existing council resources. It leverages existing relationships, and it retains the same accountability measures as we've got at the moment. It is the most straightforward option. The CCO offers financial headroom for investment and the benefits of professional oversight, but there is the transition risks, and there is a degree of separation from other broader council priorities. And the Two Waters approach, it tries to blend the two of those. However, it does introduce governance complexity, and there's still those transition costs and risks that are associated with the full CCO option as well. Right, we'll move to the finance.
That was very, very good. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Tēnā koutou.
And Mitch, has it?
Yes.
Yep. And don't be scared of us if you haven't done it before.
All right, tēnā koutou, Mayor and councillors, and thank you very much. So the part we're moving to, and which Mitchell will work through, is really around the financial sustainability of the three models that have been put up here. They're assessed on all the same criteria, each of the three, and I suppose at the outset what we'd say is that really between the three there's very little in terms of the differences in respect of their sustainability. So I'll hand over to Mitchell to work you through that and maybe take questions at your discretion, Worship.
Right, so starting off with just a little bit of a recap over what Luke has just covered from the financial point of view. These models are very similar in terms of they all require revenue funding, they all deliver a long-term financially sustainable view, and they all have a similar level of financial flexibility between them. So a term you've probably heard a fair bit throughout is financial sustainability. So the key goal, or one of the key goals of the local water done well reforms, is to ensure that water services are delivered in a financially sustainable manner. And that's been broken down into three key criteria, being revenue sufficiency. Can your revenues cover your day-to-day operations? Investment sufficiency. Are you investing enough, carrying out enough capital works on your water services assets to meet growth and cover off depreciation? And finance sufficiency. Do you have enough debt and borrowing capabilities to pay for that investment? So revenue sufficiency, once again, day-to-day operations. Can your revenue cover your costs? DIA has provided through a number of measures, the key ones of which are the balanced budget, so comparing overall revenue against your operational costs, your operating surplus ratio, which is a very similar metric, but pulls the revenues back to just operating revenues, not an accounting definition of revenue, and your operating cash ratio, are you bringing in enough cash through the door to pay for your day-to-day expenditure. Investment sufficiency, so once again, what capital works have to be carried out to ensure water services can continue to meet growth and your assets don't fall apart. A couple of key measures again, capital investment versus depreciation, the asset sustainability ratio, which compares your expenditure on capital renewals with your depreciation, and the asset investment ratio, which is very similar to the capital investment versus depreciation of your overall capital program versus what you're depreciating. And our last key one, finance sufficiency. Are the funding arrangements sufficient? So can you afford your capital program? Key one being net debt to operating revenue and borrowing headroom for disaster management and the likes. I should probably touch on here, when the LTP was prepared and the financial strategy, a prudent debt strategy was laid out, which said we need allowance of 600 million for a 1 in 5,000 year event. So, running into the individual models. At a high level, the models have all been prepared on the same basis, being the LTP updated for the draft annual plan. And then where appropriate, we've made adjustments for additional costs such as governance, overhead changes, shared services and operational efficiencies. So, into the in-house delivery model. From a revenue sufficiency point of view, this is looking at the balanced budget. The key date is 30 June 2028. That's when all these entities have to be financially sustainable by. From a balanced budget point of view, the council, remaining council, the water services and an overall view of council would all be financially sustainable. However, if you look at the individual water services, water supply is effectively bumping up the other water services, so they will take a little longer to be fully, have a full balanced budget. You're seeing there the revenue increasing over time, so the balanced budget increasing over time. That's been driven by the increase in rating for renewals that the council is currently carrying out, which increases your revenue while not increasing your operating expenditure. From the operating surplus and cash ratio, you can see that by 2028, the all water services position is very close to being 0%, meaning that operating revenue is covering all operating expenditure, including depreciation and finance costs, and improving over time. That improvement is largely driven by, once again, the increase in rating for renewals. And the operating cash ratio is quite sufficient over time, and that's primarily driven by the amount of depreciation that is incurred on our water services assets. So for context, water services assets are approximately 50% of the balance sheet of council. This is just very similar to the balanced budget. It just graphs your expenditure versus your revenue. So the black line there is the revenue over time increasing due to the increase in rating for renewals, and the bars being the expenditure. So you can see all the water services except for stormwater are well and truly covered, and stormwater is improving over time. Once again, rating for renewals driving that. Alright, so into investment sufficiency, capital investment versus depreciation. So, in all years, our capital program on water services exceeds depreciation. However, it does take until 2042 for renewals projects to exceed depreciation. So looking at the ratios, it largely bears out what you saw on that previous graph, in that renewals are behind depreciation throughout. This could be a flag to the reviewers of our modelling that we're not being financially sustainable. However, it's worth noting that this is a point-in-time measure and ignores many of the nuances around how our capital is managed, in terms of you don't build a brand new facility and start carrying out renewals on it straight away, but you will be incurring depreciation immediately. In the full business plan, there is a series of models that show how we could address these ratios if it was determined to be an issue. But for all models, it's a very similar response and is manageable within our existing facilities. So financing sufficiency, how do we pay for it? Net debt to revenue, so council will be assessed as a whole. If it remains in-house, the water services will not be assessed separately. We'll have a 280% of our total revenue. Increasing over time, our headroom due to the increase in rating for renewals. So that's once again additional revenue without any expenditure associated with it. And as a reminder, the debt headroom was 600 million, and you can see at the lowest point there's $900 million of funding headroom available, and that increases out to $1.6 billion. So plenty of flexibility there. Right, the WSCCO model. This is the Three Waters WSCCO model. So overall, the graphs are fairly similar to start with. All achieve a balanced budget by that key 2028 date. The increase in water services you're seeing is once again driven by renewals or charging for capital expenditure ongoing. From the operating surplus ratio, once again very similar to the in-house model. It improves over time, largely driven by capital renewals and similar graphs once again, stormwater being the poor cousin of the three waters. Capital investment sufficiency is the exact same. The capital program between the two models is almost identical. There's only very minor changes for some initial costs, which, given the scale of the overall capital program on Three Waters, is not material. Asset sustainability ratio and investment ratio, once again, almost identical to the in-house model. And if it was deemed an issue, has the exact same facilities and response available to it as the in-house delivery model. So where we get our first significant difference is on the finance efficiency. So because the WSCCO will be assessed separately to council, it receives its own 500% borrowing limit, which makes up for the loss of economy of scale that council has in its borrowing. So you can see there that this new WSCCO entity would have headroom of between 812 million to 1.4 billion, so still significantly above the $600 million prudent debt headroom, and is improving over time. For the remaining council, similar story, continues to improve over time, still maintains a sufficient debt headroom of between 1 billion and 1.3 billion. however only has a debt headroom limit of 280%, but has the advantage of more revenue streams to borrow against. So, next model, Two Waters WSCCO, that involves water supply and wastewater being moved out to a separate entity and stormwater remaining in-house, but financially separated. The balanced budget is once again comparable to the other two models, with all, the WSCCO being assessed separately here, slightly higher because it doesn't have stormwater, which is the slightly lower balanced budget involved. However, that's left within council, and the other parts of council are more than capable of offsetting. The operating surplus ratio and operating cash ratios are once again quite similar. The difference you'll see there is the inclusion of the WSCCO itself, which will be fully financially sustainable by 27-28 compared to the all water services, primarily because stormwater will be remaining within council. Graphs, once again, substantially the same as what you've seen on the other models. And this is how the Two Waters WSCCO would appear on the same measures, which is once again revenue exceeds expenditure within all years. Investment sufficiency, once again, substantially the same capital program as the WSCCO. From the asset sustainability point of view, it has the exact same risk around its ratio as the in-house and full WSCCO model, and the same fixes, and if it was deemed to be an issue, that the other two models have, and that you'll find that in the full business case. So financing, the WSCCO once again will have a 500% limit, maintain sufficient debt headroom throughout, slightly closer to that 600 million in the first year, but that is largely due to a lower level of revenue because there's only two services in there compared to a full suite. For the remaining council, once again, its borrowing headroom gets reduced slightly because it's being left with stormwater, but still has sufficient debt headroom throughout all the models. So that's really the overall the models. So probably what you noticed is not a huge amount of difference between them from the revenue, financing and investment sufficiency point of view. Into the rates, it's a similar story. Over there are slight differences in the individual years as costs of implementation are brought in and efficiencies are found. However, after 10 years, the cumulative rates increase is substantially the same between all three models. And into the average water services charges, once again, you can see that the overall charges are substantially the same. These are average charges, so the total revenue that the council or the WSCCO would need to charge for water over the total number of connections. What this does not show is how the burden would change to ratepayers and the likes. If it moves to a WSCCO, there will be highly likely there will be a shift in the burden of rates or water services charges, because it cannot be done based on property valuation. It's got to be done on volumetric or a fixed charge. We can't tell you what that shift would be at that moment because it will be up to the board how those charges are set. So to wrap up, overall the three models are very similar in their level of financial flexibility and level of financial sustainability, and from a cost to ratepayer point of view at an overall level are substantially the same. It will just be where that burden lies at the end. That's all I had. Next steps, I'll hand back to Luke.
Yep, okay.
Yeah, we'll ask questions about the whole thing.
Very well done, thank you. Okay, so we on next steps, and then we'll do questions. Yep.
Wrong one. That one. Yeah, so in terms of next steps, so you've been provided with, or you will be provided with a business case, and you'll be considering that next week. And that's accompanied with a council report to decide on which models to consult on, which consultation procedure to use, and which model should be the proposed model for consultation. Following that, there will be public consultation and hearings, and then a final council report to decide on what the preferred model is, and that will go into the water services delivery plan, which will need to be signed off and submitted to the DIA by September. Yeah, have I missed anything?
No, I think that's it.
Okay.
Questions?
Right, for a starter, we have Tyler.
Mitch, do you want to grab a seat and come up?
Kia ora, guys. You've given a really comprehensive overview of the financial positions of each of these entities, but I just wanted to ask around if we were to move away from the in-house model and move to more of a CCO point of view, what effect does it have upon staff and the moving over of expertise from here to over there?
There's provisions within the bill that to allow for that to transition across to the new entity, but that's where all terms and conditions are covered and you don't lose your expertise and what have you. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, what's the cost for us? What's the one-off implication for us?
So
I think Mitchell mentioned.
In terms of the changeover between our staff,
in terms of the changeover, and I'll let Mitch talk about the financial differences, that once the decision is made, we will need to do a formal change proposal with staff and discuss around transfer. So we're intending to do that while we're consulting the public, get some discussion from staff about preferred models and what have you. So that'll be a decision that's made once the model's confirmed. But in terms of the costings, Mitch can answer that question.
In terms of the costings, we factored in the change to the level of overheads that would be required. So for the two waters and WSCCO, we assumed certain overheads would transfer over, such as finance, procurement, and some elements of legal and strategic to enable delivery, and that there would be a corresponding or similar level of decrease within council. So either assuming certain staff would move over or there would be changes in the structure of council to ensure that delivery.
And that includes an asset transfer from us to them. Okay. The next one is around the more governance structures, particularly with going away from the in-house model. And I just wanted to know what the game plan is to work with Ngāi Tahu on the relationship over our water, particularly stormwater and wastewater.
So we've reached out to Ngāi Tahu to engage during this consultation process as to what input they would want to have. We have previously discussed it under the previous reforms, and we know all things water are very important to Ngāi Tahu, so that's on our radar to engage fully with them before we come back to council for final decisions.
Great. Last question, if it's right, Mr. Mayor, is in terms of you've done a really good scope on the assessment of each of these models. Did we put that on the back of the other entities that are potentially doing that across the country and sort of getting a vibe of what the other councils are currently doing?
There's quite a range out there. Some have already gone early with joint CCOs. Some of our immediate neighbours are looking at individual CCOs just for their own council as well. So it's a bit of horses for courses, and it really depends on their individual circumstances as to what fits them. An example is, for example, Hamilton City Council has gone with Waikato District. They've come up with a model that suits by the looks of what they're consulting on at the moment. So there's not a one size fits all. Yeah.
Thank you. Tim, please.
Thank you. I've just got a couple. We've actually got about 50, but we'll try and mill it down. Do we have to do this? So we have to do this. Mm-hmm. So if we look at an example like Wellington Water, and if you talk to the ratepayers of Wellington, it is an absolute failure. There is absolutely no way around that at all. And so if you wanted a really, it's kind of like, we're given examples, and they're always being the glossy ones like Scottish Water, etc. So when we have, if we looked at a CCO, whether it's 3 waters or 2 waters, the questions are, will the CCO try and leave the building? Because if they do, A, that's going to raise the costs of it setting up a separate building, but it also raises the costs of every other unit in the council because it's an overall rent, not, there's no gaps, it has to be covered. So has that been included in the modelling?
So the current financial modelling assumes that the water services team will remain within this building.
Okay. So that will not affect, because at the moment we're all big one happy family. So when we're doing works with 3 waters on roading, etc., ideally everybody's in the same building, so we're all talking. So you're envisaging there would be no separation from a CCO, whether it's 2 waters or 3 waters, and the rest of the family.
Correct.
So just clarify, when you the detailed business case, and Luke touched on it, as one of the assessment criteria was that the in-house model would enable that collaboration and joint planning more successfully than a CCO model. So that was covered in the presentation and also covered in more detail in the business case.
Yeah, but if for instance, it is decided, whatever it is, it's from government or whatever, that we do go to a CCO, we need to know if, and we're being told that there's no plan for it to leave.
So just to be clear, is the process from here is that we are required to consult on at least 2 models, and the recommendation in the business case is to consult on 3. Council gets to then decide which is its preferred model going forward. That will be put in the water service delivery plan, and that will, if the water service delivery plan complies, will go ahead. So it won't be government coming in and telling us which model we have to have. It will be council's decision after they have consulted the community, looked at the criteria, done the full assessment, consulted the community. Council will decide. Won't be directed.
If we can make that clear in the consultation document, because I think there is some concern about this being taken over. Mm-hmm. I guess the other, with regards to when we use terms like financial headroom for investment, etc., it's just debt with a pretty name. So no matter how we're going around this, I'm concerned with the discussion over the 500% headroom versus 280% headroom, because an extra 220% headroom, it's all debt. So I guess we're looking for the most efficient way to go. So I'm just comment on that.
Yeah, so look, yes, it does provide more debt headroom, but what we've evidenced in the case here is that we have under the in-house sufficient headroom anyway. There's another layer to this which would have to be considered, which is what's called the opening balance sheet. So when you sent in the CCO, the assets, if you like, would be taken out of council and put into the CCO, and accompanying those assets would be the attributed debt as well. So it won't start off with a clear headroom of 500%. It will start off with it diminished by whatever is the attributed debt. But the models all, to your point, and Mitchell did make it, is that as you increase the rating for renewals, you do also increase your capacity both for debt but also to fund the work out of what you're generating from revenue. Yeah. So it's there's quite a number of angles that feed into what will become the outcome about how you fund those renewals. Does that help?
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, any way you look at it, if it's a CCO like Wellington Water, the people of Wellington will be paying for it no matter what they've done, and this will be the same model here, no matter which way we go, whether it's in-house or CCO, 2 waters or 3 waters, the ratepayers of Christchurch will be. So I just,
Yes, the same people pay for it.
thank you.
Thank you. Kelly?
Yeah, thanks. That answer.
And I might just like to say that Kelly won his in the coast to coast for his age group. And he had to wait 19 years to do it and had to wait until he was over 60. But he did do it, so congratulations. Mate.
Thank you.
You have a question?
Yeah, I nearly did too, to be honest. That's thrown me. Okay. You actually answered most of what I wanted to know just around the debt, but you said under the current model that the borrowing cap is 280%. I guess what I wanted to know is did I hear you say that actually we're managing it well under that 280% borrow? So
Yes.
already, yeah.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, that's correct, because it's governed by the financial strategy that was developed and adopted it with the LTP, which set a minimum of 600 million. But as Mitchell pointed out, in actual fact, we're well above that minimum, about $1 billion at the moment, are we? I think
1 sec.
it goes up to 1.6 billion.
Yeah.
So, under the in-house model, there is ample capacity to meet the financing requirements.
Yeah, I know that's good to know because my fear is that we would. It's like an overdraft you've got at home. If we don't regulate it carefully, we could use it, and there's a long way back. But thank you.
Thank you. Aaron? And then Pauline.
Yeah, I think I've got 4.
Wait.
But it's all right. They're all kind of a bit different. It's going to be really hard to consult when there's so much information and what the public are actually. They just don't go into any of this depth, and we're not really comparing apples with apples because unless the charging process for both is the same, either volumetric or a delivery model, then you just cannot compare the two. So it's,
I think through you, Mr. Mayor, what it looks at is the total, if you like, of the models. So what is required in terms of revenue, what is required in terms of investment. As Mitchell pointed out, what it doesn't do with the models is say how those revenue requirements, which are done via rates, will be distributed to individual
CCO is very
or
clear
consumers.
because it's volumetric or
It's non-rates based. Yes, the CCO is clear that it can't be rates based, so that means it's either connection or volumetric.
So then is there not going to be a government direction because our city's out of whack with the rest of the country pretty much on water charging? So will there not be a direction to say, look, everyone's got to line up and you've got to be same or similar? Or is that not going to come? I know I've asked it a few times, but
I think this is the government direction. There's a number of councils will be heading down the CCO route.
yeah.
So it's
I think what Councillor McEwen's saying is, could there be a future government direction that even if you have an in-house model, you need to do volumetric
Yeah.
charge?
potentially.
And it could
I would almost bet half a glass of water that the government aren't aware that our charging is different to most of the rest of the country.
No, they're not.
I'm guessing because
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so then the other one is around with doing the consultation. I do notice that pretty much all of Paddy's team are in the room, and then there was the news story that came out on the weekend. Why would we go out to consult and then talk to Ngāi Tahu later on in the process? Have we not learnt that we're meant to start there? And I know you've reached out, but is it even a conversation with Tamaiti and Phil first before we consult, just to get a steer, or is it?
So Pari might want to comment, but there were some very early conversations on it, Ngāi Tahuhui and places like that. But this is around a structure within council as well. It's not changing levels of service. It's not going to impact on the other current issue in the paper. But you might want to comment.
We're still waiting on feedback from up to it.
Right.
Te Māori will be held up for at least a couple of weeks. So getting something from him in the short term is probably off the table.
So he is aware of the process we're going through?
Yes.
He's okay. And he's not raised any flags at this point?
Not yet.
Cool, not yet.
Yeah.
Good. And then I did have another one. This is this can be the dumb question of the day. I'll take over from Tim. When you look at the modelling, and it goes right out to 2054, when does CapEx become OpEx and vice versa? Because if you're spending, let's say, $100 million a year on water every year, forever, why do you borrow for it when you just don't rate for it? I'll just dumb question of the day.
You're right.
That's a good question.
But if you're going to spend $100 million this year and the equivalent of in 2054 and 2100, it's OpEx, isn't it?
No, it comes down to accounting definitions of, are you generating an asset at the end? So are you creating something that will have a future economic benefit or to the council, or are you maintaining a current asset? So if you're maintaining a current asset, it would be expenditure run through your P&L.
I'm not meaning it in accounting terms, but I am meaning it in just general financial terms, that if you spend that, you're spending tomorrow's money.
So to that then,
I'd love to know the difference
Between accounting and financial.
What's that?
between accounting and general financial terms.
Well, one is you eat too much, Sam. So you
I do.
borrow
Yes, you're correct.
and you put it on the credit card. You're paying for it later, and it's costing you more the meal. It's not costing you, especially if you don't pay for it for a year or two. That $50 steaks now are $70 steak.
And you're getting towards what?
Well,
It's a question
just-
about whether you fund
we borrow a lot for stuff that you're going to spend every year.
so
That's my point.
there's two parts to this. We're currently doing the rating for renewals, which is rating for CapEx. The other part is we borrow for capital expenditure so that the cost is incurred in line with when people receive the benefit of it. So you carry out maintenance, you receive the benefit immediately.
Yeah.
You carry out capital, you borrow for it because you're going to see the benefit over the next 30 years.
Great. Good. Pauline, please.
Thank you. Just a couple. How would, if we adopt an in-house model, how would we go about ring fencing that money?
Through you, Miss. Yeah, from an accounting point of view.
Yes, from an accounting point of view.
Sorry. It's a relatively doable exercise to say, look, here's what it costs us to run it, here's what we need to renew it, and this is what we're rating, that's the amount. Particularly in areas like with wastewater and drinking water, they're closed networks, so we're able to identify those assets relatively doable. We've done an exercise about what is the debt that can be attributed to it. I'll let Brent answer. It's a little more difficult around some of the stormwater, which flows through things like parks and roads and so on. But by and large, it is quite an achievable exercise to sort of wrap it up and say, here's the water component and so on. That's one of the things, though, that the Commerce Commission will be looking at as to how we've done it, and in particular what's called overhead. So those are the costs, like provision of digital. How much of that is allocated to water? How much is allocated to road and to parks? That's the exercise. It's a little more tricky, but again, there are models to do it.
Yeah, and currently, as you're aware, our water delivery is broken into, we've actually got 4 different activities, and each of those, we have separate cost centres, we have separate projects based on those activities, so it's quite easy to isolate those. The overheads that Bede was talking about, those come through as a charge to support the activity. So there are systems in place that we can do it. We'll probably have to do a bit more work on it, but just to make sure it's rock solid for when Commerce Commission come in.
Great. And the other thing is that you said that each model has to come with robust assessments to include charges and costs to consumers for the services. But with the CCO models, how can you assess those costs? Because, notwithstanding the setup costs, the initial setup costs, that's quite a bit, but the borrowing, the amount that they borrow, and that dictates debt repayment, and that all has to be funded by volumetric charging. How can you actually predict what those costs are going to be, even though we know they're going to be high? It depends on how much they're borrowing to invest and how much the repayments
Correct. So when you signed off the annual plan, included in that, not the LTP, and the proposed draft annual plan that you'll be receiving shortly, included within that is a capital plan. The infrastructure strategy in the LTP has a capital plan going out 30 years, and the
This is our one you're talking about. So I'm talking about a CCO.
Well,
we can't
the
predict
assumption is that we've used to generate these models is the baseline is the LTP updated for the annual plan. So the assumption is the WSCCO would continue with the current planned capital program that council has.
Is that a robust assumption? Because the advantage of a CCO is that they would be able to, and probably would, invest more quicker in the infrastructure.
Do you want to
That's why they can borrow more.
clarify about the statement of expectations that council could? I mean, it's the best. We couldn't do anything else. It's the best assumption we can make at the moment. But there is some ability for council to issue the CCO with a statement of expectations around what's expected of them as well.
Is there?
Yeah, there are further provisions in the bill to strengthen basically the instructions that you can give to the CCO as to how you want it. So you may say you must deliver this.
Oh yeah, but
it's a bit the same, Councillor Cotter, is that we can't predict now what a future council would do either. So we're basing it on the best possible advice that we have at the moment, and there's nothing else we can.
I understand that. But if you're using our own LTP as a kind of a projection of what a CCO may spend, but they have the ability to borrow nearly twice as much.
Does a future council?
A future council.
Oh, what you mean in terms of borrowing? Yeah.
There's going to be a potential
3-year
costs there.
They'll have, so it's been predicated like on the activity management plans and the infrastructure and what the future expectations are, what's needed. What's likely to drive it also is the standards that are set by Te Mata Arawai and what they say. So I hear what you're saying in terms of they could borrow more, but it has to be done within a program of work that is to meet the standards and the expectations. And that was one of the issues made, is that those expectations are probably more readily aligned under the in-house model because you have got the transport in the parks and whatnot than they may be under the CCO. But they still have to do it to a plan of work.
Thank you. Samuel.
Clarifying the
Yanni.
Which of the 3 options gives us the greatest opportunity to remove the chlorine from our water?
None.
No.
Wouldn't it be the in-house?
No.
And that's because
Regulations are the regulations. We have to do it. It's nothing to do with this bill.
So in terms
No
of
matter what entity.
right, but I
You
thought
have to meet, sorry, councillor, because you have to meet, same as we have to meet standards in terms of supply and distribution. We have to meet requirements around protozoa barriers, all that stuff, that doesn't change.
yeah, but if, like, for example, with what we've been through, where we've repeatedly been told we have to do X, Y, Z, and we've pushed back as a council on some things, and we've, asked for more time, or we've done some partnership, or we've had some of the officials come and talk to us at a governance level to try and find ways forward. With a CCO, would that be sort of more difficult because they're, we couldn't be as directive as a city? Although, are you saying because of the statement of intent we could?
Okay, it's not just that, councillor, and it's very clear in the bill that the CCO must comply with all those regulations. They don't have a choice.
Right. So therefore, they would be more likely to do what the regulator says than us potentially.
You can't predict that.
It's nothing to do with what
No,
we're
you can't
talking
make that
about here.
assumption.
Sorry.
We have to do it as well.
Okay.
Right. And did we, and I asked this question the other day, but where did we get to with the people that came and talked to us from central government around working together around the exemption? Have we had any progress on that?
So that might be for different discussions. So today's focus is on the paper that you need to consider on the 19th and getting out, so we can give an update about that at some later date. But we need to,
Okay. And where does the only other thing, I'm just struggling to kind of understand in terms of where would this fit in terms of the contracts that we're currently got in terms of water? Is there...
No change. Whatever contracts are in place, councillor, would be novated across to any new entity.
Right. But we're in the middle of
the man digging the trench and laying the pipe or doing it, nothing's going to change. It's just the overarching
governance.
Yeah.
But, sorry, so if you set up a CCO, they're not going to be a doer. They're just going to be a programmer, and then they're going to contract out to another doer.
Just like we do.
Is that basically how it all works?
Exactly what we do now. Aside from the operating the major plants like the treatment plant, we have our own staff. Most of the work carried out to deliver our programs is contracted out.
Right. So the CCO would just be like a holding company more like a holding company than a delivery vehicle.
The CCO would carry out exactly the same functions that we're carrying out now.
Thank you. Great answer. Right. Tyrone, please.
So moving to a CCO model would inherently, presumably, carry risks of delays in delivering capital projects, potentially risks that don't exist with an in-house model. That'd be a fair assumption, wouldn't it?
Well, there'd be some, I think that's one perspective, but part of the position might be that in actual fact the CCO, because it's focused solely on the water delivery, is better able to focus on that. Yeah. And when we talk about the efficiencies being realised, it is an assumption that those efficiencies would be realised. Now that's a matter for, we can't see into the future, but some would say, well, if all they're focused on is water delivery, it makes it easier for them because that's all they're doing and they haven't got the wider span. So there'll be two arguments.
But it might take years for that to be realised though, right? Anyway, that's fine.
Yes, and that's the transition.
Okay, so sorry, I've just got a couple of follow-ups. So, let's just say, what would be the obligations of a CCO in terms of delivering, let's come out and say it, like the Akaroa wastewater plant, right? If we went to a CCO model, would that inherit all the same obligations in terms of, how it's being funded and how it's being charged to ratepayers that exist within the the model that we've got at the moment?
Yes, we'd have to determine that. I mean, there'd be the same capital program going forward, but would have to be very clear in the statement of expectations as to what was required of them.
In terms of who carries the cost?
Well,
current funding arrangements.
Yeah, through you, Worship. In broad order, it would probably be the same. They would probably borrow, and then the consumers would end up paying that back through a charge that they levied in order to meet the cost of it.
And presumably that would be the same in terms of delivering drinking water services as well.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, Councillor, the biggest change would be, as was mentioned a couple of times, is the requirement of a CCO to move away from the value-based, property-based charging. That would create the biggest shift in terms of the ratepayers.
Victoria.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My three questions. The first one's a follow-up to Councillor Harrison-Hunt around Ngāi Tahu, and Aaron touched on it. More specifically, it's about the High Court proceedings that started yesterday. We know where they're heading with that, and it'll take some time before we get a decision. But if Ngāi Tahu are successful in their claim, I'm interested in understanding how that's actually going to impact an in-house model.
I'm not sure I can answer that, councillor. The in-house, as I said before, the in-house model is a structural thing. The levels of service in terms of what we provide to the ratepayers doesn't change at all. So I think we just have to wait and see how those proceedings go and see what the outcomes are.
But if they are successful, then it's an impact on the governance model. So I think we actually need to be turning our minds to it now.
So there's, just to be clear, that we do have a legislative framework and process that we have to follow now, so we can't stop and wait to the outcome of that. But as Brent said, that the in-house model does provide some flexibility to shift if need be, if the legislation changes. All models probably would carry that same ability if the legislation changed.
Okay, I understand that. So there's that flexibility there. Thank you. The second question then, my screen's just gone blank, just bear with. My second question is around the financial robustness of the modelling and the assumptions that underlie it. There's been a bit of discussion about that, but one of the comments we often get from public is their lack of confidence in our budgeting with our cost overruns on some of the work that we do. So I'm keen to understand whether there's been any independent auditing of our figures and whether you think there is any benefit in doing that.
Look, through you, Your Worship, a number of parts to that. What we have used as the base, if you like, is the current model that we operate on. Now, that is audited. So all of that was audited through the LTP, and it's audited as part of the annual report. So in terms of what our costings are and our assets and all of that, that does get an audit. And there was some work done, was it by Deloitte some time ago, and that has helped inform. And that was in regard to the earlier reforms,
Yes,
was it?
yes,
That was in regard to the earlier reforms, and that has helped inform it as well. So, while in respect of this, there hasn't been someone who's picked it up and given it an independent review. There have been in terms of the assumptions and what's informed it comes out of audited numbers, and also there was informed by some independent work.
Thank you, I understand. Then the final question then is really around the public confidence and management of our water services. And I know we have yet to go out to consultation, but recognising that over the years we undertake multiple levels of engagement across various platforms with our What Matters Most and Life in Christchurch. Can you just remind us about how confident are the public in our management of and delivery of our water services? What is the engagement to date at a general level telling us about that? I think it's important that we recognise that now, understanding that we're going to an in-house model potentially.
Council, I'd have to go and check back on some of those engagement levels and feedback that we got. What I do remember though, and the what matters most, is that the Three Waters certainly was uppermost in terms of things that ratepayers were concerned about.
Yeah, I recall that too. So I'm just keen to understand then what is the what information and data do we already have in terms of the public's confidence of our in-house model that we're already doing.
Right. Thank you. Marcus.
Thank you. Thinking about potential CCO models, you've mentioned volumetric charging, that'd be required to go towards rather than value-based. Does that include volumetric charging on wastewater? And just kind of thinking the practicalities of that. Water supply is easy, but wastewater would be interesting.
Yes, I'm not sure, Gab. I don't think we have meters on the wastewater at the moment.
Take Auckland Watercare, for example. You're based on the water you use. They use 80% of that goes to wastewater.
Right, cool. And I was just wanting to sort of tease out another point that other councillors talked about. Do we foresee that there could be some benefit potentially in a CCO model to accelerate the rate of renewals of the assets, which might help us move towards the likes of getting chlorine out of our water. Is that a potential benefit that the public could extrapolate out of this?
No, councillor. In terms of getting chlorine out of the water, and we've talked to this a number of times here. The rules around the distribution network, I think what you're referring to would be potentially around state of the pipes, leakage, that type of thing. We don't envisage that we would ever get to the point where you would get it down to a state where the chlorine could come out, because we're talking about public health here. It's not just around cost, and it's we do regularly see report, even when new pipe is going in, you get testing done on it, and they have to flush it out because they find things in before it's connected to the network. So it's a balance. You're playing with public health here, and I don't think that would eventuate even under a CCO. They would still have to do it to comply with the regulations, just as we do now.
Yeah, but would it be reasonable to assume that under a CCO they could actually accelerate those?
To accelerate the program, you would need to have the capacity in the market, but you would also have to have the capacity with the ratepayers to pay for the extra debt that it would be incurred to do that. So, as I say, it's a bit of a balance.
Yeah, okay. But it is a possibility, I'm guessing, with CCOs, because they will be separate entities.
Or on a purely conceptual level, it's also possible for council to do that if it chooses to. It's not that the CCO provides any greater flexibility. That already exists for council, but it is as Brent said, there's a balancing exercise about not running ahead of what you need to do in order to maintain fit and proper system.
Okay, so we've got two more questions. We've got Jake and then Tyler. No, Jake's done. Tyler, please.
Good guys, last one. It's around sort of Sam's talk around pragmatism, and for quite some time, since 2022, you've been continuously improving and working with the Transport Department to align works. Now, I'm really worried about that if it goes to the CCO and there's a limited communication and or notification to council when they wanted to do those works. How would we be able to manage the same levels of service which we're currently improving on if it goes to the CCO?
Council, it's a bit of crystal ball gazing. We'd have to put processes in place, obviously, to share programs and alignment and that type of thing. Certainly, it's a lot easier when you can just walk down the corridor and do that now. And we don't always get that perfect either. But aligning with other organisations and CCOs isn't that easy. When they have a sole focus on delivering their works. I think you would have to have some very, very clear processes in place to share those programs.
So there are potential cost implications to the ratepayers. For example, if we upgrade our transport and they want to dig it up again and we've got to redo it.
Or hold-ups in the program. Yeah.
Okay. And would that relate to similarly to the work that NZTA does, for example, when they want to notify upgrades and we've got to do 3 waters at some point? Is that sort of the same?
I guess it is on a slightly different scale, but it's yes, we do have to align with their programs as well, and it's not as easy when you can, as you say, walk down the corridor and negotiate and go, look, can you hold off on that renewal for 6 months, or yes, we can. Let's see if we can find some budget from the program to bring a job forward.
Yeah,
that's what happens now.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Perfect. Hey, team, thank you so much for what you've done, and we're at the start of a very long journey, but the amount of work that's been put in so far and the way you've explained it to us has been very clear, and the answer's been very good, so thank you very much.
Yep.
Just to clarify, the papers will go live on Thursday. Would recommend that you go in early because the business case is quite comprehensive, so you will want to, before the council meeting, to have taken time to read that business case in totality.
Okay. Wonderful, thanks very much. We'll see everyone back here at 1:00. So we've got Luke by himself, is it? No, okay. So Luke and Brent are going to have a bit of a chit chat to us about the council submission on local government water services bill. Thank you very much.
Build it again. So this one is more straightforward to the previous discussion. This is more focused on providing you with a bit of an overview of the water services, the local government water services bill. I'll just call it the water services bill. So we'll provide an overview of that. We'll provide an outline of the structure and the process for compiling the submission, and I'll highlight some of the key issues that you may wish to provide feedback on. So I've run through this. Do you think we should do it again?
It's very similar background to
this is the same background that we talked about earlier, talking about the reform. So again, it provides for local decision making under local water done well, and the flexibility for communities and councils. However, they're again just reinforcing that there is a strong emphasis on meeting the rules for water quality and investment in infrastructure. There's strong government oversight and economic and quality regulation. We need to make sure that there's fit-for-purpose delivery models and financing tools. There'll be set rules for water services and infrastructure investment, and ultimately water services will need to be financially sustainable with revenue sufficiency, balance sheet separation, and ring fencing and funding for growth. We touched on this in the previous briefing, but again, the legislative framework has been rolled out in three phases or tranches. The first part was the Repeal Act, which basically repealed the Three Waters reform from the previous government and restored council ownership and responsibility for water services. This was followed by the Preliminary Services Arrangement Act that set the transitional arrangements to move towards where we are now. And so we're considering the Local Government Water Services Bill. This was tabled in December, and is likely to be enacted by mid-2025. So this sets the enduring legislative framework for water services. It's big. There's a lot to work through, and there's a lot to understand and therefore implement and operationalise. Sort of the key features I'll run through, I'll skip through to this part here, an overview of the bill. So like I said, it's the third piece of legislation. It establishes the enduring settings for water services delivery and regulation. It retains local decision making, but it strengthens the planning, accountability and regulatory framework that is centrally governed. So the key objectives of the bill establishes flexible options for us to choose what our water services delivery model would be within the scope of what is allowed. It provides for economic and consumer protection regulation, so that's oversight by the Commerce Commission. It updates the water quality and environmental standards, so updates the regulatory framework under the Water Services Authority, Taumata Arowai, and stormwater, wastewater and infrastructure standards have been updated, and it introduces mechanisms for managing these networks effectively. So the key features of the bill, I'll just run through it clinically, is the first part is of interest. That's the water service delivery arrangements. So it provides options around here and provides council with the flexibility to choose and implement one of those options for water services delivery. Economic and regulation and consumer protection. So again, this is the oversight by the Commerce Commission. Planning and accountability framework. There'll be new requirements for strategic and operational planning. financial principles and reporting requirements. So there were new rules for financial sustainability and transparency in water services. And in terms of stormwater and wastewater environmental standards, there will be uniform national standards to streamline infrastructure upgrades and improve environmental performance. And other key aspects of the bill, like I say, it's quite a big bill. So it includes governance, compliance, and bylaw mechanisms that sort of determine how we operationalise this. So the first component that I touched on, water services delivery arrangements. Councils
covered that this morning anyway.
We went through this morning, but basically, in sum, we've got a range of options that we must decide on as a council, and the council has the flexibility to choose and implement one of those. Key implications is local government retains ownership with strict prohibitions on privatisation. Regulatory compliance, so new planning and accountability requirements apply regardless of the delivery model. And financial independence. If a CCO, water organisations, they have more borrowing capacity, potentially improving affordability for infrastructure development. But as we've talked about in our case, there's ample financial borrowing headroom, so it becomes moot. In terms of the economic regulation and consumer protection, it introduces regulated price and service quality. So the Commerce Commission will be monitoring pricing, investment and service delivery. Now that's regardless of whatever model is taken. All of this is regardless of that. Information disclosure requirements. So we'll need to disclose, or water service providers must disclose financial and performance data. And ring fencing of revenue. So any revenue collected from water services must be spent only on water services. Should also note that the bill allows the Commerce Commission to set strict minimum and maximum revenue limits and introduces quality, performance and price controls to ensure water service providers meet the required standards. So the key implications for council is greater scrutiny of operational and financial performance. Increased compliance obligations may require councils and water service providers to enhance financial reporting systems. And the economic regulation could limit cost recovery options through price controls. Now there's a new planning and accountability framework. So the key, and that'll exist current planning requirements with water specific planning requirements. So the key document here is water services strategy. So that's a 10-year plan for water service delivery, financial planning and investment. So it's a minimum of 10 years, so it can go beyond that. There's a requirement for a water services annual report. So that's specific to water and reports on the actual performance, financials and compliance. And there's a statement of expectations. So this is if a CCO is the water organisation, it would be issued by the shareholders. So that would either be council or a consumer trust, and that would be issued to the water organisations. So the key implications is water services will be managed through dedicated strategies rather than being one part of the LTP. There'll be more transparency, so the new framework is intended to ensure greater public accountability for funding and performance of water. Councils must now develop and maintain and consult on additional planning documents, so it does add additional work. And if a water services CCO is created, councils will no longer control operational decision making, but instead will set the expectations through the statement of expectations and will be able to input into the water services strategy. Financial principles and reporting requirements. This is a really fundamental part of the bill. So key part is ring fencing of revenue. So water service providers must use revenue collected from water services exclusively for water services, so it can't be used to fund other activities. There needs to be detailed financial reporting in the water services annual report. Water services providers, they've got to be able to evidence cost effectiveness in financial planning and operations, and they must ensure that water services charges and investment levels are sufficient to maintain infrastructure. So economic regulation will ensure that water services also remain economically and financially viable over time. So the key implications for council would be more structured financial management. So that's obviously through the ring fencing of revenue. So that means there's dedicated funding for water infrastructure. There is greater financial clarity, so there'll be clearer financial reporting requirements, making it easier to track and justify spending. There is reduced financial flexibility, so that's through the ring fencing. Water revenue means councils can only use surpluses to offset can't use surpluses to offset shortfalls elsewhere. And, with increased regulatory compliance requirements, there will be an initial transitional cost to meet the reporting standards and administrative standards for that. So there's new national standards that will replace the regional variations in stormwater and wastewater management. So water service providers must develop plans identifying risks and hazards for critical stormwater assets. So that's a stormwater risk management plan. There'll be sort of a national standard for wastewater and stormwater. So this establishes a uniform environmental performance requirement for wastewater discharge. In terms of infrastructure design, there will be modular pre-approved infrastructure designs to reduce consenting costs and standardised consenting. So resource consents must comply with national standards, reducing delays and costs. So key implications, there's obviously greater compliance requirements. So again, this is usually a transitional consideration. We must align with stormwater and wastewater management with the national standards, be that council or the water services organisation. Standardised designs may lower the infrastructure investment and consenting costs as well. Another thing though, it does provide regulatory certainty, so consistent requirements would simplify long-term planning. Other key aspects of the bill, so ministerial powers and intervention. So this grants the Minister the ability to appoint Crown facilitators or commissioners if council faces financial or operational challenges. It allows the government to intervene in governance where problems are identified. So that's part of the suggested feedback that we'll talk through shortly. Compliance and enforcement. So this introduces a graduated enforcement framework, including compliance orders, infringement notices and penalties. And it emphasises stronger regulatory oversight for water services providers. The bylaw mechanisms allows council to create and amend water services bylaws, but bylaws must align with the national standards. And a water organisation, so that's if it's a CCO, for example, can also propose that the territorial authority make or amend bylaws. And the role of taumata arawai, it expands responsibilities to include national engineering design standards and technical guidance for water services infrastructure. And there's also a focus on ensuring proportional compliance for rural or small-scale water supplies. So moving on to the submission component. So that's a whirlwind of the bill. Like I say, the bill is relatively mega, but that's the summary. In terms of the submission, as you'd expect, a huge part of this is operational and implementation concerns that we've got. So council staff are currently undertaking a detailed review of the bill to provide that operational and implementation feedback. That focuses on things like compliance requirements, planning and financial implications, and the practical challenges for effective implementation, because we need to implement this. But beyond that broader operational detail, there are broader themes that the council may wish to highlight in the submission that go beyond the technical implementation side of things. So I'll run through a few of the broader focus areas. I'll quickly run through them and then we'll go through in slightly more detail. So a key thing you may wish to highlight is the insufficient consultation with councils in the development of the bill itself, leading to potential operational challenges, ambiguity in ministerial powers. So that's touching on the criteria for ministerial intervention being broad, incomplete post-implementation review. So the bill doesn't require the policy review process to assess the impact on councils and communities. It's more looking at the policy and the framework at a macro level. The Crown continues to be exempt from development contributions. There's limited mana whenua engagement, so it's focused on treaty settlements, but excludes wara iwi and hapu involvement. And inconsistent legal and operational framework. So this is erring onto the sort of more operational side of things, but the bill's provisions contain ambiguities and inconsistencies that may, if not rectified, will complicate implementation and compliance with the bill. So going to the first point, the key concerns here is, I mean, the bill was drafted without direct local government engagement and lacks practical implementation detail. So there was limited consultation during the drafting and the development of this. There's a disconnect between, so because of that, there's a disconnect between the policy itself and the practical implementation. We've also, you may wish to highlight reform fatigue. So we're managing multiple simultaneous reforms, and this adds to the high costs of implementation. So this is the cost falls on ratepayers without transitional funding. So potential feedback, advocate for better consultation and co-design in future reforms, request practical implementation guidance to assist councils and ensure reforms are coordinated better, reducing unnecessary pressure on councils. So the second point, you may wish to highlight ambiguity in ministerial powers. So the minister has wide discretion to intervene in council water services. The key sticking point, I think, is the definition of a problem is broad, allowing intervention in many situations, and this could override council governance without clear checks. And it's unclear what the exit strategy would be once the Crown takes over decision making. So this is not explicit in the bill. So potential feedback could be just request clear and transparent criteria for intervention, ensure they're publicly justified and reviewed, and define what an exit strategy would be for returning control to councils. So this is a major regulatory overhaul for local authorities, but it lacks provisions for reviewing the system-wide impact it has on councils and communities. So there is a built-in review, and that assesses the overall effectiveness of the reform, but that's at a macro policy setting national level. However, there's no requirement for the formal post-implementation review to understand how the provisions in the bill have impacted councils, communities, and water providers themselves. So the feedback just recommending including a statutory review process that includes reviewing the impact the reforms have had on councils and communities, and ensure ongoing council engagement in any refinement of the policy in the regulatory framework over time. This is self-explanatory, this one. Crown's exempt from development contributions. So potential feedback on this, advocate for Crown contributions to local water infrastructure, highlight the sort of financial impact this exemption places on councils, and potentially request a review of the Crown funding policy to ensure fair cost sharing. Another key issue is limited mana whenua engagement. So the bill focuses only on treaty settlements. It excludes wider iwi and hapu involvement. So no formal partnership or governance requirements for water services planning. The Māori advisory group's role with the Water Services Authority is reduced, limiting input into governance. So you may wish to advocate for stronger mana whenua engagement beyond treaty settlements, request clear guidelines on Māori input in water service planning, and ensure local Māori perspectives are included in decision making. And to round it off, the inconsistent legal and operational framework. So this is, again, quite straightforward. There's inconsistent terminology, a lot of contradictions, impractical provisions, and some legal ambiguities. Now, I mean, this is somewhat expected with a bill this size, but if it's not rectified, it will provide some quite heavy implementation and operational complications, to put it lightly. So feedback would be to request consistent and precise legal definitions throughout the bill, recommend reviewing operational feasibility before enforcement of some of those provisions, and ensure alignment with other local government legislation to prevent conflicts. So again, much of this has been covered at a line by line sort of situation in the staff operational implementation part of the submission. So we're aware and we're making suggestions to a lot of these inconsistencies. So they're those key things. In terms of next steps from a process perspective, it's quite a compressed timeline. So we are in the tail end of completing the detailed review of the bill. So we'll finalise the operational and implementation feedback, and we'll identify any additional areas of concern that we need to get clarity on. We're preparing the council submission, so we want to incorporate any issues and recommendations that you have for inclusion in there, and we want to be able to highlight both operational challenges and the high-level strategic and policy concerns. Then we'll submit it for final approval to you for review and endorsement. So in terms of the timings, today's 11th of Feb, so we've got the council briefing. On the 13th, we'll circulate a draft of that submission. Now it'll be more focused on the high-level strategic side of things, and we'll highlight some of the more operational and implementation components, but just bear in mind we're still working through those, especially around our suggestions, because a lot of it is line by line. We'll ask for your feedback by 17th of February if you've got any feedback or any points that you'd like raised in it, and then we can provide that for your consideration on the 26th of Feb, and we'll be coming to F&P with that submission, so we can get it to Parliament, or the Parliament submissions due on the 28th.
Just so it doesn't sound all doom and gloom, there are some good positive moves in the bill as well.
Yes.
Just in terms of pushing for national engineering design standards, consistency of data standards, that type of thing, the wastewater standards, I think that will help streamline things in the future. We've yet to see them. We were involved in the design standards and the data standards in the previous reforms, and there was some really good work done there. We don't know what the wastewater standards and stormwater standards might look like, but at least we will have a consistent standard to aim for when we design stuff and plan it. So I think that there are some good things that will come out of it, but there's certainly some big holes operationally that we've picked up We're concerned about gaining access into properties and whether it trumps our local drainage act, that type of thing. So you'll see those as well.
Right, we have a few questions. Aaron, then Tyler.
Yeah, so that's covered off, and I'm like pretty much everything you've got there. What's in the bill? For me, it's what's not in the bill, and that is around, and it was raised earlier, chlorination. I would like us to be bold and request that areas can opt out of chlorination with a mandate from the public. So if over 50% of your voting public voted for an opt-out, then you could not have chlorination. So for them to consider that, because then they can set the standard and go, okay, if that's what they want, then we expect the infrastructure to be at this level, and then the public can, because the public's never been given a choice on it, and I think they should have a choice on it. And given that only 42% of people vote in local body elections, they shouldn't be that scared. But I think the number would jump if you could suddenly vote to opt out of chlorine.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
Effectively, you're asking to override Taumata Oroai?
Yeah, because they've set a safety standard that I think is way beyond what the risk appetite that the public's willing to accept is.
Thank you. Yep, we've got a good call. Got
So
to push
if
on.
we can do that some way, would
Tyler?
Kia ora, guys. That's really good, by the way. I really enjoyed the recommendations that you had. I just wanted to hone in on a couple of little things. The first one was, I think you've already explained it, around what does national standards mean? But you're saying that there is currently no national engineering standards for the whole of the country.
So that's correct, Councillor. So what we have here, we have our infrastructure design standards here in Christchurch that we've developed, and a number of other councils have picked those up and used them, but they differ slightly from area to area. And what can happen is, well, there's two things. One is when you engage consultants, designers to work on stuff, they have to change what they're doing from area to area because they're all different, which creates, there's cost with it. So by having a national engineering design standard, you'll get more standardisation of materials as well, hopefully getting efficiencies that way as well. So I think it's yet to see the final, but the early stages of it were quite promising.
Great. Last two really quickly. The next one is around the ministers in charge of this bill. Would that be the Minister for Regulation and maybe the Environment Minister being in charge of this? Or?
No, sure which minister.
Local government. Yeah, Minister for Local Government.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay.
I
think there needs to. My recommendation would be to potentially look at getting more ministers and.
Yeah, well, put it in. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you want.
And the last one is around the mana whenua part of it, and just highlight that they love to talk about central government as economic growth and how beneficial it would be to have mana whenua at the table instead of actually having them in court. So I think that will be a really good sell to the current government around that. Thanks.
Pauline, please.
You mentioned that an in-house model would have to provide an annual report. Would it not be part of our LTP?
No, it would be a separate water services annual report.
Okay, so I just wanted to clarify.
Same information, but split out. A lot of those documents we talked about, like the 10-year strategy, we already do, but we'll just have to split that out of the current existing council documents.
And would you also pull it out of the infrastructure strategy
correct.
as well?
So the council infrastructure strategy will be everything except water services.
Okay, and regarding a statutory review, would we be suggesting a time frame for that? 1 year, 2 year, 3 year?
Ideally, I mean, there is a time frame set within the bill itself for that macro level policy and reform review. I think that's 2 years. Is that correct? Yeah. It's around within 2 years. There will be a review. Our suggestion is including the implications on councils themselves to be part of that review as well.
Okay, yeah, that's good. You mentioned the design standards that were done in the previous reform. Is it worth making a note of that somewhere so that they, in case they haven't referred to them, or do you think they would have referred to them?
We've already, Council, we've already discussed it to try and get some clarification from Te Mata Arawai, and they are using that earlier work.
Oh, that's good.
They're looking at setting up working parties to go through that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, look, it's really, really good submission. Good bones, thank you. Good stuff.
Okay.
Well done.
We've got 3 more questions and we're out of time, but these 3, but no more after these 3. Thank you, everyone. Sarah, please.
Thanks. Just as a matter of principle, no matter whether it's a CCO or an in-house kind of team, I believe that the same level of borrowing should be available. So while we've got debt ceiling available now, we of all cities know that unexpected things happen. So I think that, and other cities might be in a different position, and this legislation is going to last a long time. So I think that we should be saying that if needed, that it should be the same level of borrowing for both CCO or for councils, for in-house stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
So putting one down or putting the other one up?
Or maybe somewhere in between.
Yeah, but I mean, as a matter of principle, they should be the same. And if it's dedicated for water, it's for water.
Just on that, though, Phil, we probably need to get some advice, because that's not like literally the way it's structured. The debt was, because it's removed from our balance sheet, they could then afford to do it, whereas consolidated with everything else, it's a challenge. So I guess I'd be nervous about putting that in straight away until we've got technical advice, and it might be something Bede can take away. And come back, because it's when they explained it at the time, there was a deliberate reason why they did 280 and 500, but unless that's changed, I've missed it.
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of regulated legislative debt caps, and it might be that they could do something about that. But I think advice is good.
It's
You're right.
not, but that's, or unless we just go back to how they explained it at the time, because I don't, it would be good to get proper advice on it, because I don't think that would work. Cool.
Thank you. Timothy?
Just 2 quick ones. And it's great there'd be national standards. So have they looked at any way, or would they consider, or could we mention with regards to bulk buying? So if there's a national standard, and like whether they're a size of a medium city internationally, our whole country, so could there be a way, whether it's in-house or out-house, that right across New Zealand there would be a better buying strategy for the equipment needed to supply water? So just ask the question.
That's interesting.
I think that would be a major step forward.
Ministry of Works used to run one.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, it is. It's just stupid. We all go and do it separately, especially if there's national standards. The second one is based on a city or an authority's history of delivery in clean water. So if you're looking at Havelock North and Wellington Water, they've obviously had dismal, and but we've been okay, and others have been okay. So when we supply reports, everything costs money. So could there be a longer term for those who have better strategies, better planning, forward planning, so our reporting timeframes are less than those that need to be monitored? Because it seems it's the same brush for everybody, but when we look across New Zealand, some are under, and no fault of theirs, it's just some areas have fewer residents, so therefore the pressure on them financially is harder. So there's more risk to some communities than others. So can that be recognised in some way? Sorry to... You get what I'm saying.
That makes sense. That's clear.
Thank you.
Yanni, please.
I mean, just I guess some really quick feedback. One is one of the key aims of this bill is to reduce the regulatory burden of the drinking water quality regime and improve proportionality in the application of regulatory powers. So this is the chance to tell them we don't want chlorine in our water. Have we quantified the cost that we've spent to date and that we've anticipated to spend to meet, have we quantified the burden that we're faced with under the current standards? So we can clearly say to them, here's something you could do to save the ratepayers money.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor, the work, that was why Te Mata Arawai agreed to work with us doing the research on the deep bore water, because we did provide information as to what it would cost to comply with the contact time for the supply of water, and it was going to be like $500 million or figures to that.
Yeah.
So yes, they are aware of the costs of doing it, especially with Christchurch being unique in as much as we've got a large number of pump stations versus the 1, 2 or 3 in some of the other cities. So they are aware.
Okay, so I think
but
being able
definitely
to
making that point.
quantify also the cost of the forced amalgamation with the peninsula. Like we took on the cost of the peninsula without any say of our citizens or our residents, and we've put a lot of money in there. And I see in the bill that they're going to try and be proportional, so smaller water supplies will get lesser burden, but actually we've inherited a huge burden that they've never recognised. So I think that would be good.
So councillor, what in effect that means is
financial burden. Like a financial burden.
Yeah. So councillor, what in effect that means is making it easier for us, because some of the smaller communities, they're looking at alternatives in the way that we can provide safe water, like end-of-line systems at houses. So it's actually made it a lot more flexible, and I think up to about 50 households.
Make it far cheaper than having
it's
to
actually
put
going to be a lot cheaper. So they have listened.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah,
so I think just telling part of that story that we welcome that ability, and not just recognising it because of the city's area, but actually the geography of a city is what is important, and the costs associated with it. I just two other quick things. One is the date online is the 23rd of February. So, and you've got the 28th. Have we got an extension? Or?
Yeah, so they've given everybody, all councils, an extension.
And the final point I'd make is I think we should really we should be taking out ads in newspapers and encouraging the public to make submissions. And I've raised this pretty much from day one of the forced chlorination by central government. But we need a public relations campaign to encourage the public to tell government that we don't want chlorine in our water. Here's the chance for people to have their say. They never got it, as I think Aaron has said previously. They never got a chance to have their say on it. Here's the one opportunity they get. What are we doing to encourage the community to activate, to make submissions and put pressure on the ministers, the MPs, etc.? Like, is anyone working on a campaign? Or if not, can we actually get one underway?
Okay, yep, they're writing it down. Good. Yeah. So that brings us to thank you, Luke and Brent. That brings us to the end of today's information session, and thank you very much for the good effort. Thank you. Cheers. Right. And we need just 5 minutes.